this might be the window where some sort of amalgamation of the Mountain West, the Pac-12 merge, and then somehow Gonzaga gets swooped up in that, maybe. How's it going, everyone? And welcome back for Season 3 of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer, and a lot has happened over the summer. I'm sure a lot of you are still either like playing a little bit of catch-up, get set back into the coming college athletic seasons. Obviously, college football is going to be starting here in a couple of weeks. We have college basketball, which is still, we're less than 100 days away, but we are still a couple months out. And so figuring out like who's on what team, where everyone is, what's the outlook for everybody is going to be an interesting thing. So in this episode, we're going to talk about some of the newcomers, the best newcomers, some of the best returners to the WCC. There have been a lot of roster changes, so we'll go into some of that. We'll also start to talk about some of the schedules as we were starting to get better ideas of what teams are starting to look like schedule-wise. Looks like we have had one schedule fully released, Santa Clara, so we'll review that and go through that game by game and just kind of see where we think that Santa Clara team is going to fall. And we'll get into all of that, but I think we have to start with what is the big news all over college athletics and all of sports right now is realignment. And so we can't not talk about this, even though it at the moment is not directly impacting the WCC. We know this is going to be something that's going to impact the league in some fashion down the road, even if it's not right now. So for those of you who need a little bit of a catch up in this week, has definitely been a whirlwind on that front. Friday really was the day when everything happened, and it happened very quickly. So in the last few weeks, we know the Pac-12 had already lost USC. We're going to lose USC and UCLA. That was announced last year. This is their last year in the Pac-12 before they jumped to the Big Ten. That was already out there. A couple weeks ago, then it was announced that Colorado would then be jumping ship and going back to the Big 12, which is where they were obviously before joining the Pac-12 about a decade plus ago. And that started the wheels turning again on realignment. That started the conversation about the sustainability of the league. And then there were rumors about Arizona and Arizona State and maybe Utah. And while those started to settle down and the Pac-12 CEOs all met to discuss their new media rights deal with Apple TV and what that was going to look like, the dollars and cents, and getting into that, nothing was approved. It was presented, but nothing approved. And then what we saw is that the Big Ten jumped at this opportunity. And Washington and Oregon were the two big fish out there that the Big Ten were interested in. And that's not new. Like, that had been out there for a while, that if those two schools were going to move, the Big Ten made the most sense. And really, the linchpin of all of that talk was Oregon. If Oregon goes, then Washington would go with them. And if Oregon goes, because this is all driven by football, as much as I, being a basketball fan and not really a college football fan, don't like that idea and don't like hearing it, these are the facts. This is all driven by football money, TV money. And if Oregon went, Washington was going to go. And if Oregon left the Pac-12, the dominoes were going to start falling after that. And sure enough, on Friday, it was announced that Oregon would be leaving for the Big Ten, that Washington would be leaving for the Big Ten. And then it was announced that Arizona State, and Utah had applied for membership in the Big 12. And that is more or less going to be a done deal, which means that what was once the Pac-12 then was down to the Pac-10, then 9, and now after this wave, they are down to 4. Washington State, Oregon State, Cal, and Stanford. That's it. what was once this proud, successful conference of champions is down to 4. And the 4 are not not the most impressive. And now it's what happens to the remainder of this league? What happens to the branding and the legacy of this conference? How does this impact maybe the Mountain West? How does this impact other conferences? Obviously, how does this impact the WCC? Does it at all? Does it impact someone like, I don't think we're going to see any impact of like the Big Sky or the Big West because they're too small, but what happens to those 4? And there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of reports out there of what is happening. It sounds like maybe that Cal and Stanford have reached out to see what possibility it is for them to join the Big Ten. That would make more sense for those 2 institutions rather than the Big 12. What happens to Washington State and Oregon State? It feels like those 2 are just getting left out in the cold. I mean, the thing that makes the most sense to me is that they'll end up with the Mountain West. But then with the Mountain West, it's like, okay, but the branding of the Pac-12 is probably still better. So maybe they should the Pac-12 should reach out and try to recruit select teams from the Mountain West. But then as we saw with the San Diego State situation, the buyout from the Mountain West is so large that maybe that's not a route you want to go down. So what then is there to do? What can you do moving forward? What is something that you can actually take out of this, and where do these teams go? It sounds like maybe a merging of the 2 leagues is maybe one of the things that is going to make some sort of sense. There's rumors about Memphis. There's rumors about SMU. That has been out there for a while because that was going to be the pairing with San Diego State. San Diego State, maybe Boise, maybe UNLV, Colorado State. Like there's so much chaos around this now, and the fate of the remainder of the pack, whatever, is now in the balance. And how do I see this impacting the WCC, if at all? This might be the window where some sort of amalgamation of the Mountain West, the Pac-12 merge, and then somehow Gonzaga gets swooped up in that. Maybe that's like the only scenario I see where like that there's going to be some sort of movement with the WCC. Right now they're stuck at 9. BYU obviously is gone. Again, the reminder for those who are still playing catch up on everything WCC, BYU is now in the Big 12. So this is the West Coast Conference is a 9-team league. And there are still some sort of talks of what about expansion for the WCC. It seems like the league is pretty set on what they have right now. Honestly, probably the biggest component is making sure that the teams you still have are actually happy and like where the league is going moving forward. And a lot of that is going to have to do a lot of that, I think, is obviously the TV deal and where that goes and what streaming looks like and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I think any of us who have watched any games on the WCC network know that is a platform that could use a lot of upgrades, that could use a lot of investment and focus. And that sometimes, and while network games are, there's not much of an issue there. Like I feel like that is an area where would be the ESPN deal, the CBS deal. Those are actually have been very beneficial to the WCC. We've seen success on court of USF, Santa Clara, LMU over the last few years. So we see that coming. Portland has been up and down. So like, again, part of it is on court success and what those teams do. It'd be great to see another one of them actually break into the NCAA tournament that's not named Gonzaga or St. Mary's. But it also just comes to eyeballs, and it does. Now I do think there are more eyeballs on this league than there ever have been before, but how much are those new eyeballs making a difference in these TV deals? And only time will tell as we start to hear more about the negotiations on that front and where the rest of the realignment falls. Because again, this is a basketball first conference. None of these teams outside of San Diego play football. And all these TV decisions, all these realignment decisions have been made with football first in mind. And again, I know that's frustrating. It hurts me to frame it in that way and to say kind of like throw your shoulders up and be like, well, kind of is what it is, and we're along for the ride. So hopefully we start to see a little bit more that results out of that, and we'll see how realignment goes. All right. So I'm going to transition now and talk a little bit more about what we have coming up in this new WCC season, in this new men's basketball season coming up starting in November. And let's start with the guys who are coming back and the guys who will be returning to the WCC. And honestly, the list is actually fairly thin. If you really think about it, Gonzaga lost a lot of guys. USF is going to have almost a new starting five. Santa Clara is going to have a lot of turnover. LMU has a lot of turnover. So a lot of the stars that we had a year ago are gone. So really identifying who those next guys are going to be immediately is going to be an interesting thing. Again, there's a few guys you can go to, and I'm going to start with maybe the one that probably is most obvious is going to be one of those better players in the league. And he was one of the breakout stars of last year, being his freshman year, and that's Aiden Mahaney at St. Mary's. Mahaney, we saw last year really come onto the scene and come up in some of the biggest moments for the Gales a year ago. We saw what he did against Gonzaga and Moraga. We saw what he did at BYU as the buzzer went off. We saw what he was able to do late in games and in critical situations all year long. Now, as we got deeper and deeper into the season, it did seem like teams started to adjust to him a little bit more. And even by the time they got to the NCAA tournament, he hadn't quite figured out how to make those adjustments. But you expect that freshmen are going to have some of those struggles, and they're going to really need to make some adjustments. So what we see from year one to year two, I think, is going to be critical for Mahaney. I fully expect he's going to make some of those adjustments. He's been working out. He posts a good amount of updates to his Instagram stories. So you can always kind of keep tabs on what Aiden Mahaney is up to. And then also he was invited to the Chris Paul Elite Camp. So that's another opportunity where he was with other elite guards around the country, and other collegiate guards around the country. And this is a guy who doesn't shy away from the big moment. I think just the keys for him are adjustments and then also getting stronger, which again is a natural thing for college athletes to kind of go through as you go from year one to year two to year three, is becoming stronger and becoming, again, the transition of playing against boys to playing against young adults to playing against men. And that is a strength component, which he will only get better at. So again, best returners, in no particular order, Aiden Mahaney is going to be the first one I mentioned. Next one, I'm going to head up to Spokane, and he arguably, I know some will make the case he should have been the defensive player of the year last year, but he should absolutely be the front runner for defensive player of the year this year, and that's Anton Watson. Anton Watson really has been the best glue guy in the WCC probably for the last 2 or 3 years. And we know everything he can do defensively. He can guard multiple positions. He knows how to defend without fouling. He rebounds well. He stays in front of guys. But then the other thing we saw toward the end of the season last year was what changed and how he was able to adjust on the offensive end. He became a better offensive threat toward the end of the year as Gonzaga needed him to become that. As teams started to focus more and more on Drew Timme and try to take him away, it became critical for Watson to step up and give more offensively, and he was able to do so. We saw his three-point shot get better toward the end of the year. We saw his creativity get better. He got to show more of it at the end of it. I don't want to say it got better. He was able to show more toward the end of the year because his role was starting to change. He was asked to do a little bit more. And I think that's what's going to happen this year. Even though Graham Ike does come in and that's a guy who if healthy, you know what he's going to be able to do. That's an 18-10 sort of guy. But Anton Watson is the veteran of this Gonzaga squad. He is the guy who knows the system best. He's the guy who knows the culture best. He is Spokane's own. This is a guy who I think is going to take another step in his development. I think it was a great thing that he returned. I think there's a few things that he was be able to work through and be a better prospect on the NBA front come next year. And I do think that he's going to figure out a way onto an NBA roster, at least a summer league team, next year, as he goes into this last year of his eligibility. So this is it for him. I expect a great year from Anton Watson. And so I have two more that are going to stick in my head, and I feel like there's back and forth on these two. So I'll start with the other St. Mary's player that's on my list, and that's Alex Dukas. Obviously, Alex Dukas was actually one of the bigger surprises of the offseason when he decided that he was going to return to St. Mary's. And it really did feel like this is like an unfinished business sort of return. We saw how St. Mary's was playing in that game against UConn in the tournament when Alex Dukas went down. They still had a lead when he went down. They were in that game when he went down. And then it all fell apart once he left the game. And maybe that would have happened anyway. Maybe UConn would have pulled away, but we will never know. And St. Mary's ended up losing the game by 15. So again, that one is neither here nor there. But the fact that he returns, you're returning one of the best leaders in the conference. You're returning one of the best shooters in the conference. You're returning one of the tougher players in the conference. This is a guy who's going to be that leader, be that toughness, be that clutch player that St. Mary's is going to need in a lot of games down the stretch. We'll talk reason why as we talk about their schedule in a little bit. But Alex Dukas is one of those guys that St. Mary's is going to lean on a lot going into this year, and it really did fill a hole that had some question marks if he had not returned. That three spot was going to be a bit murky going into next year, but with him there, his return solidifies the 3 spot for St. Mary's, and he's going to be one of the better players on the West Coast and in the WCC. All right, so next one, this is a guy that has been, he has been Mr. Everything for Portland for the last 3 years. Tyler Robertson has done it all. He scores, he rebounds, he dishes it out, he has triple doubles, like he'll drop 30. It's like, this is a guy who just knows how to fill up a stat sheet, knows how to be in the right place at the right time. And I wish that he had some more help on this team. Because again, like a lot of injuries a year ago. So again, nothing that he could possibly do about that. But Tyler Robertson remains one of the more versatile, one of the tougher players in this league. And he's going to be doing it for a Portland team, which is really has a lot of question marks going into the year. And we'll be able to kind of see how that starts to work itself out, and how exactly is Tyler Robertson in his last year going to be able to lift this team up, hopefully to be in the top half of the WCC. There's a window there, even though you have to talk about like USF, Santa Clara, and LMU are all kind of like right there in the middle of the mix. And those 3 are going to be probably the middle 3 teams. Portland still has a shot to potentially break into that 6 or 5 slot if everything goes their way. And if everything goes their way, Tyler Robertson is going to be at the center of all of it. All right. And I'm going to start actually going into the best newcomers in a little bit, but I do want to segue. And so for some of you who follow me on social and it's been sort of mentioned during the podcast from time to time that I'm a bit of a craft beer connoisseur, and I'll be posting a lot about it on Instagram or some of the other platforms. But one of the things I also love is seeing like new places pop up and be able to support those new businesses. One of which is actually some of my friends who have started up Match Point Brewing here in the Bay Area. And over the last month, they created a Kickstarter as they are trying to raise funds for a new tap room, which is going to be here in the Bay Area. Their two core beers are a jasmine rice lager and a mandarin wheat ale, which I do have a can of one of them right here, as you can see. And this has been a great small brewery. They have their beer in a number of locations. You can check it out on their website, but also follow them on social media. Like you can find them at Matchpoint Brewing on Instagram and also on TikTok. And so they're doing a number of things. One of the things as far as a feature of their new tap room is that they'll be doing a beer of the week to fundraise for local athletic programs and recreational sports organizations. They hosted a tennis tournament just a couple months ago as one of their fundraising events. They're planning to do a 3-on-3 community basketball tournament next year in El Cerrito, which is in the East Bay, just north of Berkeley, during March Madness. So this will happen next March. So again, I encourage everybody to go out and support them. You can find information on their social media about all the fundraising opportunities, and then also some of the packages that are coming with some of those fundraising opportunities. And for those St. Mary's people who are around, they're also going to be pouring at the St. Mary's Summer Wine and Beer Fest, which I will also be attending this coming weekend. So if you're out there, check them out. Check them out on social media. I know they'll appreciate the support. And again, I'm big on just supporting local businesses, especially those who are in the craft beer scene, because that is an area where I have a lot of passion. All right. And with talking about new breweries, and I'm going to segue into the best newcomers that are going to be coming into the WCC. And I think I'm looking at this in a couple of ways. There are the known commodities, and then there are the high potential. And two of the names I'm going to say are high potential, and then the one is a very clear known commodity, and he's going to hit the ground running. Honestly, he may be the best player in the league, and I'll start with Ryan Nembhard. The Creighton transfer, gone to Gonzaga. Yes, this is Andrew Nembhard's brother. So if the name sounds familiar, that would be why. And he averaged 12 points for almost nearly 5 assists a game last year in a sophomore year for Creighton. And this was a really, really good Creighton team who got to the second weekend. So I expect Ryan Nembhard to hit the ground running at Gonzaga, because again, if we as we talked about Gonzaga almost all year long last year, what were they missing? A point guard, a true point guard who could take the lead. This is that guy. Ryan Nembhard is that guy who can take charge, be that guy down the stretch. He's going to give Gonzaga a steadiness that maybe they did not have handling the ball up and down the court on a routine basis. And yes, there is still going to be there's still some help in that backcourt area, but this is the guy who's going to be taking the bulk of that load. This is a guy who's going to be stepping up into what is going to be probably the marquee position for Gonzaga. He's going to be their best. He should be their best player next year. He's going to be at least their most important player next year. And so I expect Ryan Nembhard to be completely in the mix for WCC Player of the Year next year, probably with Mahaney and maybe the likes of like Mitchell Saxon, or maybe like there's a few others that might actually kind of like get into that mix. Tyler Robertson might be in that mix, but Ryan Nembhard is going to hit the ground running. He is going to be one of the best players in the league next year, and he'll be making his WCC debut in November. So a couple of the others, I'm going to go to Santa Clara, and this is also high ceiling. And I'm going to go with Adama Ball. So Adama Ball is a transfer from Arizona. He's also on the U20 French national team. He didn't play a whole lot at Arizona, not a whole lot of minutes anyway, but in those minutes, he shot 39% from 3-point range, which, again, this is something that Santa Clara does want to have, and there's a lot of space for that. Again, you think about the Keyshawn Justice role that is now vacant for the Broncos. That is something they're going to need filled, and Adama Ball should be able to fill that role pretty well. I don't know if it's going to happen immediately. I don't know if it's going to grow into that. Again, there's a lot of new pieces at Santa Clara, but I expect Adama Ball to get as much opportunity as anybody else going into the season. He did play 7 games over the summer with the U20 French national team. He averaged 11 points, shooting 37% from 3, 53% from 2. So I feels like he's got the momentum to go into next season as being one of those guys, one of the best newcomers for in the WCC, and then of course for Santa Clara. And then the other one, I'm going to go just up 101, and I'm going to visit USF for my other potential best newcomer, and that's going to be Mike Sharavjams. This is he is the 6'8" guard transfer from Dayton. And while, again, he played about 23 minutes a game last year. He was averaging about 5.6 points per game. But what makes him unique, what is going to make him special, why a lot of people are high on him, is because he's a 6'8" point guard. And you just do not see a whole lot of those in college basketball, really on any level. And so just his length, just his athleticism is going to be something that you don't see, especially in the WCC, all that often. So his uniqueness, his also on a team that's going to have a lot of opportunity to kind of fill into these roles, fill into these spots. USF has a lot of turnover going into this year. Josh Coonan does return. Marcus Williams does return. But you have a lot of holes. And so they brought in a lot of transfers, a lot of really good transfers, and it will be interesting to see how it all fits together. But there's more hype around the arrival of Mongolian Mike more than anybody else coming up to the Hilltop. Probably maybe more hype than anybody in the WCC, short of maybe even Ryan Nebhard coming to Gonzaga. So there's a lot to be excited at USF, and Sharavjams is the big reason why there's excitement in San Francisco. I could spend all day long talking about all the newcomers and everything else, but we're going to transition into some of the schedule updates, and I'll start with what USF has announced, and they have announced their Chase Center game. It's going to be against Minnesota, and I'm going to check on that day just to be sure I have it right, because that one is going to be an interesting one. USF going into that one, it's going to be interesting because I feel like USF, again, we have a lot of questions. This Minnesota team is not a very good Minnesota team. That game will be on November 26th at Chase Center, and that will be a doubleheader with the women who will be taking on Colorado State. So I think it's just a great opportunity for USF to see a Power 6 team, but this is a very low Power 6 team. I think they were net in the 200s. So this is got to get for USF, but it's still a good opportunity to see a Power 6 team on a neutral court back at the Chase Center. All right, so really the big one is Santa Clara, because they released their whole schedule just the other day. And Santa Clara has some really good games on there. And that really all starts with the Emerald Coast Classic. And they'll be starting with Oregon. And then they will take on either Alabama or Ohio State. So automatically, Santa Clara is going to has 2 opportunities to get big wins early on in the schedule. And that'll be over the Thanksgiving weekend. Oregon, Alabama, Ohio State, all great opportunities for Santa Clara to pick up great wins This is something they haven't had an opportunity to get over the last few years out in non-conference. Obviously, they've had opportunities against St. Mary's and Gonzaga, but they haven't had that non-conference, that big marquee wow win against other teams. We saw that against TCU a bit 2 seasons ago, not last year. Boise was a good win, but even Boise, as good of a team as they are, doesn't have that wow factor as much as Oregon, Alabama, or Ohio State will have, especially if they get Alabama and are able to knock them off. That is going to be a big lift for Santa Clara. Also on their schedule, they have New Mexico, they have Utah State, Washington State. They'll be taking on Stanford. They'll be at Maples Pavilion. So they have a lot of good opportunities to get good wins. San Jose State on there, and that's not a cakewalk either. And that, again, maybe a crosstown rivalry over in San Jose. So a lot of opportunity for Santa Clara. Good, solid schedule for them. There are a couple of games that might be trap games, but they have to avoid the traps against, say, Duquesne or Yale, so that they could really bolster their resume going into conference play. And a conference that no longer has those two games against BYU, so you have to make the best of what you can in the non-conference, because your opportunities in conference for good wins is that much smaller. All right, and we'll wrap it up with what St. Mary's has put together, at least to this point. There's some of this which has been officially announced, some of it which is still being put together. Now, I will say, I don't think that St. Mary's doesn't have the Alabama opportunity there yet, but as part of the Continental Tire main event in Las Vegas, they will start with San Diego State, which obviously they've played San Diego State each of the last few years. That's a great matchup. I'll say it now, like first the 55 wins that game. But then the second game, there's an opportunity if they were to get Xavier. Washington is the other opponent, and as we saw last year, St. Mary's would probably not want to see Washington again. But to see Sean Miller's Xavier team would be a great opportunity for this team. Might be the marquee game if they can get it. I don't see the other marquee game on their schedule quite yet, so I'm hoping that we'll see that one pop up somewhere down the road. They do see Boise State. They have a return game at Colorado State. They will play UNLV. Missouri State, they do play Utah, which is to be determined on the date. Weber State is also already slated on the calendar. So there's a lot of solid games, very much like what we saw a year ago, where there wasn't that cupcake game. There wasn't that gimme game for St. Mary's. Everybody was a solid team. And again, maybe it's a little bit more inside basketball that these are really good teams. But there's a lot of opportunity for St. Mary's to, again, kind of build that analytical resume that's going to show that they're going to end up still being probably a top 20 net team by the end of the year. I would still like to see the marquee game, the brand game, I guess, a better way to phrase that. But this is a solid schedule already. Again, you already have San Diego State, you have Colorado State, you have Boise, UNLV, Middle Tennessee, Missouri State, Utah, and then either Xavier or Washington. It's a solid schedule to this point. Again, hats off to hats off to both the coaching staffs at Santa Clara and St. Mary's for getting these schedules put together, because these are looking like really solid tournament level resumes if they can pick up the right wins and position themselves in the right way before conference play starts in January. And we'll go in more in depth once we get official schedules in a little bit more. So we'll talk about Gonzaga and what theirs looks like, because there's about Murderers Row. Gonzaga's is going to be a lot, and to go into that is going to be a lot. So we'll do that in a different episode. So again, like as I start to wrap this one up, I do encourage you all to check out Matchpoint Brewing. You can find them on on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at Matchpoint Brewing. Check out their Kickstarter. I'm participating in that as well. Be sure to follow me on all the platforms. I'm still going to say Twitter, even though it's not Twitter, at Post by Zach on Instagram, same user handle on TikTok, all those platforms. Also on Threads now. So at Post by Zach there. Subscribe on the YouTube channel, Unofficial WCC Hoops Podcast. And that will wrap up this first episode of season 3 of the Unofficial WCC Hoops Podcast. We'll continue to get interviews with people from around the conference and really start to get into it as we get closer and closer to the season. So again, for those who are coming back, thanks for sticking around for season 3. For those who are hopping on new, I hope that we'll be able to deliver some great content to you and be able to engage with you a little bit more on all the platforms. Again, like at me, like join the conversation, all that sort of stuff. So until the next episode, have a great couple of weeks, and I will catch you later.